The verdict of silence. The grand chamber of the Intergalactic Council stretched wider than any Earth stadium, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with the heartbeats of 1,000 different worlds. Ambassador Thomas Chen stood at the center of it all, his weathered hands steady at his sides, watching as representatives from 900 civilizations prepared to cast their judgment on the human race. Thomas was 73 years old, and he had spent the last 40 years of his life working toward peace between Earth and the stars. His gray hair caught the strange light of the chamber, making him look almost ghostly against the swirling colors of alien forms around him. Behind him stood his team of 12 human diplomats, each one trained for this exact moment, though none of them had truly believed it would come. The charges against humanity were being read by Overseer Krell, a being that looked like a tree made of pure energy, with branches that sparked and crackled as it spoke. Its voice filled the chamber like thunder, translated instantly into every language present. The species known as humanity stands accused of the following crimes against galactic order, Krell announced. First, the creation of artificial intelligence without proper safeguards. Second, the manipulation of space-time through unauthorized experiments. Third, the spreading of chaotic social structures that threaten established hierarchies. Fourth, the refusal to submit their military forces to council control. Each charge echoed through the vast space, and Thomas noticed how the other species leaned forward, eager to see humanity brought low. The merchants of Corva, floating in their glass spheres filled with pink gas, trembled with anticipation. The warriors of the Grim Confederacy, massive beings covered in natural armor, clicked their claws against the floor in a rhythm that meant satisfaction. Deputy Ambassador Rachel Morrison, standing at Thomas's right hand, whispered in his ear, "They've been planning this for years, haven't they?" Thomas gave the slightest nod. At 35, Rachel was brilliant but still learning the art of reading between the lines of galactic politics. She didn't yet understand that this trial was never about justice. It was about fear. Humanity had joined the Intergalactic Council only 50 years ago, the newest members of a community that had existed for millennia. But in those 50 years, humans had done something that terrified the established order. They had improved things. They had taken the Council's technology and made it better. They had solved problems that other species had accepted as unsolvable. They had shown that the old ways were not the only ways. How does humanity plead? Overseer Krell demanded. Thomas stepped forward, his voice calm and clear. Before we enter our plea, I have a question for this assembly. Have we committed crimes, or have we committed the crime of making you uncomfortable? A ripple of anger passed through the chamber. The representatives of the Silver Hegemony, beings that looked like living mercury, shaped themselves into spikes of outrage. The philosophers of Zentara, creatures of pure thought that manifested as shifting geometric patterns, flickered with disapproval. You dare to question this council? Krell's branches spread wider, electricity dancing between them. I dare to ask for honesty, Thomas replied. Our artificial intelligences have harmed no one. They help manage food distribution across 17 star systems, preventing famines that killed millions before we arrived. Our space-time experiments have opened new trade routes that cut travel time by 90%. Our social structures, which you call chaotic, have brought democracy and freedom to worlds that never knew such concepts. And our military, which we keep independent, has never fired a shot except in defense of innocent lives. The youngest member of the human delegation, Lieutenant James Park, shifted nervously. At 28, he was a military liaison who had volunteered for this diplomatic mission. He knew what the others didn't yet realize. Back on Earth, in bunkers buried beneath mountains and hidden in the dark spaces between stars, humanity's true fleet waited for a signal. Pretty speeches will not save you, said Ambassador Thrix of the Hollow Worlds, a creature that existed partially in this dimension and partially in another, its form constantly shifting like smoke. The vote has already been discussed in private chambers. You know this, Thomas smiled, and it was not a happy expression. Yes, we know. You decided our fate before we ever entered this room. But that's the beautiful thing about fate, Ambassador Thrix. Sometimes it has surprises. He turned to address the entire assembly, his voice growing stronger. You fear us because we change things. You fear us because we don't accept that suffering is necessary, that inequality is natural, that the powerful should feast while the weak starve. You fear us because in 50 years we've shown that your 1,000-year-old empire could be something better. Enough, Krell's voice boomed. We will proceed to the vote. All those who find humanity guilty of crimes against galactic order, signal now. The chamber filled with light as species after species cast their vote. Red lights for guilty, blue for innocent. The room became a sea of red, with only a handful of blue lights scattered like stars in a crimson sky. The shepherds of Glenara, peaceful beings who had been saved from extinction by human medical intervention, voted blue. The free traders of the Outer Reach who had prospered from human trade routes voted blue. But they were so few against so many. The verdict is decided, Krell announced with satisfaction. By a vote of 873 to 27, humanity is found guilty. Your species is hereby banished from Council space. You have 100 galactic days to remove all human presence from our territory. Any humans found in Council space after this deadline will be eliminated. The chamber erupted in celebration. The beings who had voted against humanity cheered in their various ways. Some sang, some flashed colors, some released pheromones of joy that made the air thick and sweet. But Thomas Chen did not react with anger or despair. Instead, he pulled out a small communication device from his pocket, a simple black square no bigger than his palm. Ambassador Chen, Rachel whispered urgently. What are you doing? Thomas pressed his thumb to the device. A soft blue light pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Then it went dark. I'm implementing Protocol 0, he said, loud enough for the nearest representatives to hear. The celebration stopped. Overseer Krell's branches pulled inward with confusion. What is Protocol 0? You spent so much time preparing for this trial, Thomas said, his voice carrying across the now silent chamber. But you never asked yourselves one important question. What if humanity was preparing too? He gestured to his team, and they all pulled out similar devices, each one pulsing with that same blue light. Protocol 0 is our complete withdrawal from Council space, Thomas continued. But not just our people. Everything we've built. Everything we've shared. Everything you've come to depend on without realizing it. Ambassador Thrix flickered more rapidly. You cannot simply take technology that has been integrated into our systems. We can and we will, Thomas replied. Every piece of human technology has a quantum signature, a marker we embedded from the very beginning. Medical devices, agricultural systems, transportation networks, communication arrays, even the coffee makers in your offices, they're all connected to the Protocol 0 network. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. The representatives of Corva began spinning in their spheres, calculating the economic impact. The warriors of Grimm stopped clicking their claws, suddenly realizing that their upgraded weapon systems were human-designed. But more than that, Thomas continued, his voice growing harder, we'll be taking our knowledge with us. Every research paper, every technical manual, every scientific breakthrough we've shared. Did you know that 70% of your current medical procedures were developed or improved by human doctors? That your food production has increased by 200% using human agricultural methods? That the very translation system allowing this assembly to function was upgraded by human linguists? Overseer Krell's energy form darkened. You planned this betrayal from the beginning. No, Thomas said firmly. We hoped for partnership. We prepared for betrayal. There's a difference. He turned to address the 27 species who had voted for humanity's innocence. To our true friends, we extend an invitation. Any who wish to maintain their alliance with humanity may join us in our new home. You have 50 days to decide. New home? Krell demanded. Where will you go? We control all of known space. Thomas smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. Known space, yes, but the universe is infinite, Overseer. While you were watching us, suspecting us, putting us on trial, we were building ships you cannot detect, cities you cannot find. We were preparing for exactly this moment. Lieutenant James Park stepped forward, surprising everyone, including Thomas. Ambassador, I've just received confirmation. All human personnel are accounted for and beginning evacuation procedures. The fleet is ready, Thomas nodded. Thank you, Lieutenant. He turned back to the assembly one last time. You have given us 100 days, but we need only 30. In 1 month, there will be no trace of humanity in your space. No humans, no human technology, no human knowledge. You'll have exactly what you voted for. A galaxy without us. As the human delegation turned to leave, Krell called out one more time. You cannot survive without the Council.
You will come crawling back!
Thomas paused at the chamber's exit. Perhaps, or perhaps you'll discover that it was never humanity that needed the Council. Perhaps it was the other way around. The massive doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, leaving 900 species to contemplate what they had just done. In the silence that followed, the first reports began coming in. Human doctors were leaving hospitals mid-surgery, after stabilizing their patients but taking their equipment with them. Human engineers were shutting down power plants after giving 2 weeks of emergency power. Human teachers were downloading all educational materials from shared networks. Protocol Zero had begun, and across 1,000 worlds, the lights that humanity had brought were beginning to dim. The Council had won their vote, but as they would soon discover, some victories carry a price too high to pay. The age of humanity in Council space was ending. The age of consequences was about to begin. The great unraveling Captain Sophia Reyes stood on the bridge of the cargo hauler's steadfast dream, watching her homeworld of Meridian Colony shrink in the viewport. At 48 years old, she had spent half her life building this colony from barren rock into a thriving world of 30 million humans. Now she was taking it apart piece by piece, Captain. "We've got the last of the atmospheric processors loaded," reported her first officer, David Kim. The 32-year-old had grown up on Meridian, and Sophia could see the pain in his eyes. "The terraforming equipment is secure in Cargo Bay 7. Sophia nodded, keeping her expression neutral for the sake of her crew. Around them, space was filled with ships of every size and class, massive colony vessels that could hold entire cities, small personal craft carrying individual families, and industrial haulers like hers loaded with the infrastructure of human civilization. "How long until the surface is returned to its original state?" she asked. 14 hours, David replied. "The restoration protocols will remove every trace of human presence. Every building, every road, every modified organism. It'll be like we were never here." That was the point, Sophia knew. Protocol Zero wasn't just about leaving. It was about taking everything humanity had brought to the stars. The Council wanted humans gone, and they would get their wish completely. On the planet below, Engineer Marcus Thompson supervised the systematic dismantling of humanity's greatest achievement in the Meridian system. The Nexus Gate, a massive ring structure that created stable wormholes for instant travel, was being taken apart bolt by bolt. Marcus was 60 years old and had designed half the components himself. Every piece was a work of art, precision engineering that had taken decades to perfect. Now his team was reducing it to transportable segments in a matter of days. "Sir, the Corvin merchants are here," his assistant Jennifer told him. "They're demanding to know why the gate is being deactivated." Marcus looked up from his work to see 3 of the floating spheres approaching. The beings inside their pink gas bubbles were agitated, spinning rapidly. "This is outrageous," the lead merchant broadcast. "We have contracts, trade agreements. You cannot simply destroy the gate." "We're not destroying it," Marcus replied calmly. "We're taking it with us. And if you check your contracts, you'll find Clause 47B clearly states that all human technology remains human property, licensed for use only while we maintain diplomatic relations. But without the gate, our trade routes to the outer sectors will take months instead of hours." "That's unfortunate," Marcus said, returning to his work. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before voting to exile us." The merchants spun faster, their gas turning a deeper shade of pink that indicated rage. "The Council will hear of this. This is economic warfare." Marcus finally looked up again, his expression hard. "The Council already knows. They're the ones who exiled us, remember? We're simply complying with their verdict. You wanted us gone. We're going, all of us. Everything of ours." Across human space, similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds. The medical station orbiting Sanctuary Prime was being evacuated, its advanced surgical suites carefully packed away while alien doctors watched in horror. The agricultural domes of New Harvest were being deflated and loaded onto transport ships, leaving behind the original barren soil that could barely support the most basic plant life. But nowhere was the impact more immediately felt than on the trading station of Commerce Hub 7. The massive structure served as the economic heart of 3 sectors, processing billions of transactions every day. All of it ran on human-designed quantum computers and economic algorithms. Administrator Zelka of the Silver Hegemony watched her monitors in growing panic as system after system went offline. Her mercury-like form rippled with distress as she tried to understand what was happening. "The humans are removing their software," her aide reported. "Without it, we're back to our original processing speed." How much slower? Selka demanded. Approximately 10,000 times slower. Selka's form lost cohesion for a moment, droplets of her being spattering against the walls before she pulled herself together. 10,000 times slower meant that transactions that took seconds would now take hours. The entire economy would grind to a halt. She immediately sent an emergency transmission to the council. "The humans are destroying our economy. This must be stopped." The response came from Overseer Krell himself. "The humans are simply complying with our verdict. They have been exiled and are removing their presence as required. But we didn't mean for them to take everything." Then perhaps, Krell replied with evident frustration, "You should have been more specific in your vote." Back on the evacuation fleet, Captain Sophia Reyes received a priority message from Earth. The face of President Catherine Hayes appeared on her screen, the 70-year-old leader looking tired but determined. "Captain Reyes, how is the evacuation proceeding in your sector?" "On schedule, Madam President. We'll have complete withdrawal in 20 days. Good. I wanted to inform all sector commanders that we've received over 200 requests from Council species asking us to leave our technology behind." Sophia almost laughed. "Let me guess, they're offering to pay us?" "Some are offering extraordinary sums. The Grim Confederacy offered us 3 star systems if we leave our weapons technology. The Zentaran philosophers offered to share their complete historical archives if we maintain their upgraded research facilities." "And your response?" President Hayes's expression was like iron. "We take everything. No exceptions. They made their choice, and choices have consequences." In the engineering section of the evacuation fleet, young technician Amy Chen worked on something special. At 25, she was part of a team implementing the most ambitious part of Protocol Zero. They weren't just removing human technology. They were removing human knowledge from Council databases. "Quantum erasure is at 60%, she reported to her supervisor. "Every research paper, every technical manual, every innovation we've shared is being deleted from their networks." Her supervisor, Dr. Michael Roberts, nodded with grim satisfaction. "Make sure we get the medical databases. I want every surgical procedure, every drug formula, every treatment protocol we've developed removed." Amy hesitated. "Sir, won't people die without that information?" Dr. Roberts, who had spent 30 years sharing medical knowledge with alien species, only to watch them vote for humanity's exile, struggled with his conscience. "We're leaving basic emergency procedures. And nothing more. They wanted us gone, Amy. They don't get to keep the benefits of our presence while exiling us." As the evacuation continued, the true scope of humanity's integration became clear. Human linguists had developed the universal translation protocols that allowed the Council to function. Human programmers had created the algorithms that managed traffic through space lanes. Human agronomists had developed crops that could grow on almost any world. On the Council capital world of Supremacy Prime, Administrator Thrix materialized in Overseer Krell's private chambers. The interdimensional being's form was more agitated than usual, phasing in and out of reality rapidly. "The reports from every sector are catastrophic," Thrix said. "Food production is falling, medical facilities are failing, trade is slowing to a crawl. We didn't realize how dependent we had become." Krell's energy form pulsed with frustration. "How did we not see this? How did we let one species become so integral to our civilization in just 50 years? "Because they were clever," Thrix admitted. "They didn't conquer or demand. They helped. They improved things. They made themselves useful, then essential, and we never noticed until now. Can't we replicate their technology? We're trying. Every species is trying, but their technology is based on principles we don't fully understand. They approach problems from angles we never considered. Without their theoretical framework, their devices are just incomprehensible artifacts. Meanwhile, in the hidden spaces between stars, humanity's true fleet revealed itself. These weren't the civilian ships everyone could see evacuating colonies. These were vessels built in secret, using technologies that had never been shared with the Council. Admiral James Harrison stood on the bridge of the flagship New Horizon, a ship that was less like a traditional vessel and more like a mobile city. At 55 years old, he had overseen the secret construction project for 20 years. "All Ghost Fleet vessels are reporting ready," his operations officer announced. 2,000 ships prepared for transgalactic jump. The Ghost Fleet was humanity's insurance policy. Ships equipped with drives that could traverse the void between galaxies. loaded with everything needed to start over in a place the Council could never reach. "What about our friends?" Harrison asked. "The 27 who voted for us? We've sent them encrypted coordinates. If they choose to follow, they'll find us." As the evacuation entered its final phase, desperate messages flooded human communication channels. Species that had voted for exile begged for exceptions. They offered treaties, alliances, anything to keep some human presence. The merchants of Corva offered exclusive trade rights. The warriors of Grimm offered military protection. The Zentaran philosophers offered to share the secrets of consciousness itself. All received the same response. "You have chosen. We have accepted. Farewell." On the 20th day, Captain Sophia Rhea supervised the final stage of Meridian Colony's evacuation. She stood in what had been the capital city, now an empty plain with no trace that millions had once lived here. "Restoration complete," David Kim reported. "The planet is exactly as it was before we arrived." Sophia took one last look at the world she had helped build and then helped destroy. "Signal the fleet. We're ready for departure." As the steadfast dream lifted off, carrying the last humans from Meridian, similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. Humanity was keeping its promise. In 30 days, they would be completely gone. But in their wake, they left a galaxy beginning to understand the true cost of fear and prejudice. Systems were failing, economies were crashing, and civilizations that had existed for millennia were facing challenges they no longer knew how to solve. The Council had wanted humanity gone. They were about to learn that sometimes, getting what you want is the worst thing that can happen to you. Into the unknown void, the void between galaxies stretched out like an ocean of absolute darkness. No stars, no planets, just the empty space that separated island universes. It was here, in this cosmic wilderness, that humanity's ghost fleet assembled for the greatest journey in human history. Admiral James Harrison stood before a holographic display showing 2,000 ships arranged in perfect formation. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering, built with technologies that the Council races had never seen. The flagship New Horizon sat at the center, a massive sphere 3 kilometers in diameter, its hull covered in sensors and projectors that made it nearly invisible against the cosmic background. "All ships report ready for transgalactic jump," announced Navigation Officer Lisa Park. At 38, she was one of the youngest officers to ever plot a course between galaxies. Dimensional fold generators are at optimal charge. The dimensional fold drive was humanity's greatest secret. While the Council races used variations of wormhole technology to travel between stars, humans had developed something entirely different. They had learned to fold space itself, to step outside the normal dimensions and cross impossible distances in moments. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the chief scientist of the Exodus fleet, monitored her instruments carefully. At 45, she had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. "Energy readings are stable. We can maintain the fold for approximately 6 hours, which should put us deep in the Andromeda galaxy." "And our passengers?" Harrison asked. 3 billion souls, all in stable conditions. The life support systems are functioning perfectly. 3 billion humans packed into 2,000 ships carrying everything they would need to start over. It was the largest migration in human history, and it was happening in complete secrecy. In the medical ship Hope's Dawn, Dr. Elizabeth Carter made her final rounds. She was 52 years old and had been one of the leading physicians in Council space. Now she was checking on thousands of patients who had been evacuated from alien hospitals. "How are they handling the transition?" asked her assistant, Dr. James Wong. "Better than expected." "Many are actually relieved. They were tired of being treated as curiosities or threats by alien medical staff." She stopped at one particular bed where a young girl, no more than 10 years old, was drawing on a tablet. The girl Emma had been born with a rare condition that required constant medical support. Her parents had been told by Council doctors that nothing could be done. "What are you drawing, Emma?" Elizabeth asked. "Our new home," the girl replied, showing a picture of a world with 2 suns and purple grass. "Mom says we're going somewhere nobody's ever been before." Elizabeth smiled. "That's right. And when we get there, we're going to build something amazing." In the engineering section of the colony ship Frontier Spirit, Marcus Thompson was running final checks on the equipment they had salvaged from Council space. Every piece of technology, every tool, every component had been carefully cataloged and stored. "We've got enough to rebuild everything," he told his team. "Gates, medical facilities, agricultural domes, even the entertainment complexes. But this time we build them for us, not for anyone else." His assistant, Jennifer, pulled up a manifest. "We also have something interesting. 17 ships from the species that voted for our innocence have requested to join us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "They're willing to leave everything behind?" "Apparently they see which way the wind is blowing. The council is already falling apart, and we've only been gone for 20 days. Indeed, back in council space, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without human-maintained jump gates, travel between systems had slowed to a crawl. Without human agricultural science, food shortages were spreading. Without human medical knowledge, diseases that had been easily treatable were becoming deadly again. On Supremacy Prime, Overseer Krell convened an emergency session. His energy form was dimmer than usual, a sign of extreme stress among his species. "The situation is beyond critical," he announced to the assembled representatives. 40% of our trade routes are non-functional. Medical emergencies are increasing exponentially. Food riots have broken out on 17 worlds. Ambassador Thrix materialized in his shifting, smoke-like form. And it's only been 20 days. What happens when the emergency supplies run out? When the backup systems fail? "We must recall the humans," insisted Administrator Zelka of the Silver Hegemony. "Offer them anything. Full council membership, autonomous territories, whatever they want." "They won't come back," said a new voice. It was Ambassador Vrix of the Shepherds of Glenera, one of the few species that had voted for humanity. His kind looked like tall, willowy trees with consciousness. "We warned you this would happen. Humans don't forgive betrayal easily. Then we must force them to return," declared General Korg of the Grim Confederacy, his armor-plated form bristling with anger. "With what fleet?" Vrix asked calmly. "The same ships that rely on human-designed navigation systems? The weapons that use human power cells? How will you even find them? Their ghost fleet uses technology we can't detect." Back with the human fleet, the moment of departure had arrived. Admiral Harrison stood before the command console, his hand hovering over the activation key. "All stations report ready," came the chorus of confirmations from across the fleet. "Citizens of humanity," Harrison broadcast to every ship, "today we leave behind the known for the unknown. We leave behind those who feared us for a future where we can build without limits. We leave behind judgment for freedom. Together we take the next step in human evolution." He pressed the key. Reality bent around the fleet. Space folded in ways that three-dimensional minds couldn't fully comprehend. Colors that had no names swirled around the ships as they stepped outside normal space-time. For a moment that lasted eternity and no time at all, 3 billion humans existed between dimensions then, with a flash of light that would have been visible from Earth if anyone had been looking. The ghost fleet vanished from the Milky Way galaxy. They reappeared 6 hours later in a region of space no human had ever seen. The Andromeda galaxy stretched out before them, 2.5 million light-years from their origin, filled with 400 billion stars and infinite possibilities. "Navigation, where are we exactly?" Harrison asked. Lisa Park checked her instruments, her face lighting up with excitement. "We're in what appears to be a stellar nursery, Admiral. New stars being born all around us, and I'm detecting at least 40 potentially habitable worlds within 100 light-years. Any signs of intelligent life? Scattered signals, but nothing like the Council. If there are civilizations here, they're either much more primitive or much more advanced than what we left behind." Dr. Sarah Mitchell was studying her own readings. "Admiral, you need to see this. The background radiation here is different. It's cleaner somehow. Like this region of space hasn't been depleted by millennia of exploitation." Harrison nodded. "Then we found our new home. Signal all ships to begin deep space surveys. I want to know everything about our new neighborhood." As the fleet dispersed to explore their new territory, they began to receive the last transmissions from the Milky Way. The messages were increasingly desperate. The Council was offering anything and everything for humanity's return. Some species were even threatening war against those who had voted for exile, blaming them for the catastrophe. But the most interesting message came from an unexpected source. It was a transmission from the 27 species that had voted for humanity, sent through quantum channels that the Council couldn't intercept. "To our human friends," the message began, read by Ambassador Vrix himself. We are preparing to follow you. The Council has shown its true nature, and we want no part of a galaxy ruled by fear and prejudice. If you will have us, we wish to join you in your new home. We can offer technologies and knowledge that might help in your settlement. More importantly, we can offer friendship without conditions. Admiral Harrison convened his senior staff to discuss the request. It could be a trap, suggested Security Chief Robert Stone. The Council might be using them to find us. I don't think so, said Dr. Mitchell. The quantum signature on their message is genuine. And remember, these species risked everything to vote for us when it wasn't popular. Captain Sophia Reyes, attending via hologram from her ship, agreed. We shouldn't punish our friends for the crimes of our enemies. If they're willing to leave everything behind like we did, they deserve a chance. After much debate, Harrison made his decision. Send them the coordinates, but not directly to our location. Give them a rendezvous point where we can verify their intentions. If they're genuine, we welcome them. If not, we disappear again. As the human fleet began its exploration of Andromeda, they made incredible discoveries. Planets with resources beyond imagination, stellar phenomena that defied their understanding, and ancient artifacts that suggested civilizations had risen and fallen here long before humanity existed. On one world, designated New Eden by the survey team, they found something extraordinary. The planet was not just habitable, it was perfect. 2 suns provided constant but gentle light. The atmosphere was ideally suited for human life. The soil was rich and fertile. It was as if the planet had been waiting for them. This will be our capital, President Catherine Hayes declared when she saw the survey reports. This is where we begin again. As colony ships began their descent to New Eden's surface carrying the first wave of settlers, humanity's new chapter began. They had been exiled from one galaxy and had found something better in another. They had been rejected by those who feared them and would now build something without those constraints. But even as they celebrated their new beginning, they couldn't completely forget what they had left behind. The Council had taught them a valuable lesson about the price of being different, about the danger of being too successful, about the fear that innovation could inspire in those who preferred stagnation. This time, humanity would be more careful. This time, they would build their civilization on their own terms. And if they encountered new alien species, they would remember the lessons of the Council and proceed with wisdom earned through betrayal. The exodus was complete. The real journey was just beginning. When Giants Fall 1 year had passed since humanity's exodus, and the Milky Way galaxy was unrecognizable. On Supremacy Prime, the once gleaming capital of the Intergalactic Council, half the lights no longer functioned. The towering spires that had reached toward the stars were dark, their human-designed power systems offline with no one left who understood how to repair them. Overseer Krell stood in what remained of the Grand Council chamber. His energy form, once brilliant and powerful, flickered like a dying flame. The crystalline walls that had pulsed with life were now cracked and dim. Of the 900 species that had once attended council sessions, fewer than 300 still sent representatives. The Corvin Merchant Alliance has collapsed completely, reported Administrator Zelka, her Mercury form barely maintaining cohesion. Without the economic algorithms the humans created, their entire trading system has failed. 3 of their core worlds are experiencing complete societal breakdown. And the Grim Confederacy? Krell asked, though he feared the answer. Civil war. Without human weapons technology to maintain their military superiority, old rivalries have resurged. They're using primitive kinetic weapons now, destroying infrastructure it took centuries to build. The reports were the same from every sector. The Zentaran philosophers, who had prided themselves on their intellectual superiority, couldn't solve basic logistical problems without human-designed systems. Their research stations were failing one by one, centuries of knowledge locked behind encrypted databases they couldn't access. We must try again to recreate their technology, insisted General Korg, one of the few grim military leaders still loyal to the Council. With what knowledge? Zelka responded bitterly. They deleted everything. Every research paper, every technical manual. We have the physical devices, but we don't understand the science behind them. It's like giving a combustion engine to a Stone Age tribe. The truth was even worse than they admitted. Several species had attempted to reverse engineer human technology, resulting in catastrophes. The Helix Confederation had tried to recreate human medical scanners, causing a radiation leak that killed thousands. The Silver Hegemony's attempt to rebuild a jump gate had created a spatial anomaly that consumed an entire moon. In the depths of space, on a derelict station that had once been a thriving trade hub, a small group of aliens huddled around a failing heat source. They were refugees from different species, brought together by desperation. Among them was Grix, a young Zentaran philosopher who had been born after humanity's arrival and had never known the galaxy without them. "My grandfather tells stories of the time before humans," Grix said, his geometric form dim with hunger. "He says life was stable then. Predictable." "Stable, yes," replied an elderly Corvin merchant named Daleks, floating weakly in her cracked sphere. "Also stagnant. We had the same technology for 1,000 years. The same problems. The same limitations. Humans showed us we could be more. And then we exiled them for it," added a grim warrior whose armor was cracked and dull. "We feared their progress more than we valued their contributions." Meanwhile, in the Andromeda Galaxy, humanity thrived in ways they never could have imagined. New Eden had become a paradise of human achievement, its twin suns illuminating cities that seemed to grow from the Earth itself, designed in harmony with the natural environment. President Catherine Hayes stood on the balcony of the Global Assembly, looking out over the capital city of Renaissance. In just 1 year, they had built something magnificent. The city housed 5 million people, with architecture that incorporated lessons learned from 100 different worlds. "The agricultural report, Madam President." Her aide handed her a tablet. "Food production is exceeding projections by 300%. The soil here responds to our techniques even better than Earth's did." "And our new allies?" Hayes asked. "The 17 species that joined us are integrating well. The shepherds of Glenara have shared their botanical knowledge, helping us identify native plants with medicinal properties. The free traders of the Outer Reach have established new commerce networks. Everyone contributes, everyone benefits." It was a system based on mutual respect and shared growth, the opposite of the hierarchical council structure they had left behind. Here, no species was considered superior or inferior. Innovation was celebrated, not feared. In the research city of New Galileo, Dr. Sarah Mitchell worked alongside scientists from the allied species. They had made discoveries that would have been impossible under council restrictions. Free from bureaucracy and fear, they pushed the boundaries of what was possible. "We've cracked it," announced her colleague, Dr. Vrix of the Shepherds. "Instantaneous communication across galactic distances, not just between star systems, but between galaxies." Sarah stared at the equations on the screen. "This changes everything. We could establish communication networks spanning millions of light years." "Should we share this with our former galaxy?" Vrix asked carefully. Sarah considered for a moment. "No, they made their choice. But we should monitor them. We need to know if they become a threat." Using their new technology, they established listening posts that could intercept transmissions from the Milky Way. What they heard was heartbreaking. The Council wasn't just failing. It was destroying itself. The recordings were played in a closed session of humanity's new interstellar alliance. Admiral Harrison, now the military advisor to the president, presented the intelligence. "3 major wars have broken out in the past month alone," he reported. "Without human peacekeeping forces and diplomatic protocols, old enemies are settling ancient scores. The death toll is in the billions." "Billions?" President Hayes couldn't hide her shock. "How is that possible?" "Cascading failures, Madam President. When the medical systems failed, plagues spread. When food distribution collapsed, wars broke out over resources. When transportation failed, worlds became isolated and desperate. Each failure triggers 3 more. Captain Sophia Reyes, now an admiral herself, added her perspective. "We're also detecting massive refugee movements. Entire species are abandoning their home systems, searching for anywhere that might still have functioning technology." "Do we help them?" asked Dr. Elizabeth Carter, her medical ethics demanding she speak up. "We have the power to save lives." The debate that followed was intense. Some argued for humanitarian intervention. Others insisted the Council had made their choice and must live with the consequences. Still others worried that any contact might reveal their location. Finally, President Hayes made a decision that satisfied no one completely, but everyone could live with. We establish refugee stations at the edge of the Milky Way. Anonymous, automated, providing basic supplies and medical care. We don't reveal ourselves, but we don't let innocent beings die. It's not enough, but it's something. The refugee stations were built using stealth technology, appearing seemingly from nowhere at the edges of council space. They provided food, basic medical care, and temporary shelter. No one knew where they came from, but desperate beings didn't ask questions when survival was at stake. Back on Supremacy Prime, Overseer Krell received reports of the mysterious stations with a mixture of hope and dread. "It has to be the humans," he said to his remaining advisors. "Who else would have this capability?" "But why help us after what we did?" asked Ambassador Thrix. "Because that's who they are," Krell replied, his form pulsing with regret. "They offered us partnership and we gave them exile. Now they offer mercy even though we deserve none." He made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Send a message to the void. Broadcast it on every frequency in every direction. "What message?" Thrix asked. "An apology, a full admission of our mistakes, and a plea, not for their return, but for their forgiveness." The message was broadcast across the cosmos, a desperate cry from a dying civilization. It spoke of regret, of lessons learned too late, of the price of pride and fear. In Andromeda, the message was received and played before the Interstellar Alliance. The chamber was silent as Krell's words echoed through the space. "We were wrong. We let fear guide us instead of hope. We saw your potential as a threat instead of a gift. We destroyed ourselves with our own prejudice. We don't ask for your return. We know we've lost that right. We only ask that you remember us not as we were at our worst, but as a cautionary tale for others. Don't let fear of change destroy what could be beautiful." President Hayes stood to address the Alliance. "We've heard their plea. The question is, what do we do about it?" The debate continued for hours, but in the end, humanity and their allies made a choice that defined their new civilization. They would not return, but they would not abandon the galaxy entirely. They would continue the refugee stations, gradually expanding them to provide more comprehensive aid. They would share basic knowledge through anonymous channels, enough to prevent complete collapse but not enough to restore the old order. "They need to rebuild on their own terms," Hayes explained. "If we simply return and fix everything, they learn nothing. But we won't let them die in darkness." As humanity and their allies continued to build their new civilization in Andromeda, they did so with the knowledge of what they had left behind. The Council's collapse served as a constant reminder of what happened when fear triumphed over progress. When prejudice overwrote potential, they built their new worlds differently. Open, inclusive, celebrating diversity rather than fearing it. They created a civilization where asking what if was encouraged, where innovation was rewarded, where being different was seen as strength. And in the dying light of the Milky Way, those who had exiled humanity began the long, painful process of rebuilding. Some species learned from their mistakes, forming new alliances based on cooperation rather than domination. Others continued to blame everyone but themselves, falling further into chaos. The giants had fallen, brought low by their own prejudice. But from their fall, perhaps something better could eventually rise. It would take generations, maybe millennia, but the seeds of wisdom had been planted in the ashes of pride. The price of pride 5 years had passed since humanity's exodus, and the two galaxies had become mirrors of opposite fortunes. In Andromeda, the human-led alliance had expanded to include 43 species with cities on 300 worlds and a population approaching 10 billion. In the Milky Way, the former Intergalactic Council controlled less than a third of its original territory. With entire sectors fallen into darkness, a new Eden, a monument stood in the center of Renaissance Plaza. It wasn't a tribute to humanity's escape or their new success. Instead, it bore the names of every species from their former galaxy, even those who had voted for exile. The inscription read, "We rose not in spite of others, but because we remembered the cost of division." President Michael Chen, who had succeeded Catherine Hayes 2 years prior, stood before the monument on the 5th anniversary of the Exodus. At 58 years old, he had lived through both the height of humanity's integration with the Council and their bitter exile. "Today, we make a decision that will define us forever," he announced to the gathered crowd and the billions watching across the Alliance. "We have received a formal request from the survivors of the Intergalactic Council. They ask not for our return, but for our guidance. They ask us to teach them what we've learned. The request had come through the quantum communication network, delivered by someone unexpected, Ambassador Alina Vasquez, the human diplomat who had chosen to stay behind. She had spent 5 years helping refugee populations, becoming a legend among the desperate and dying. Her message was simple: they're ready to learn. In the Alliance Council chambers, representatives from all member species debated this unprecedented request. The shepherds of Glenara, through Ambassador Vrix, spoke first. We who stood with humanity from the beginning understand the desire for justice, but we also understand that justice without mercy becomes revenge. The newest member of the Alliance, the Crystalline Collective who had made contact just months ago, added their perspective through harmonic tones that translated as, "We have observed both galaxies. One thrives through cooperation, the other dies through division. The choice seems clear." Admiral Sofia Reyes, now the senior military advisor, presented the strategic analysis. "We've monitored their collapse for 5 years. They're no longer a threat. Their most advanced ships can barely achieve faster than light travel. Their weapons are 2 generations behind what they had when we left. But can we trust them?" asked Dr. Sarah Mitchell, her scientific mind demanding evidence. "How do we know this isn't just desperation that will turn back to prejudice once they recover?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Marcus Thompson had spent the last 2 years developing a new technology, consciousness bridging. It allowed species to truly understand each other, to share thoughts and emotions directly. "We could offer this to their representatives," he suggested. "Let them experience what it's like to be human, to be different, to be feared for your potential. And we experience their fear, understand why they acted as they did." President Chen made the decision. "We'll send a delegation, not to the Milky Way, but to a neutral point between galaxies. We'll meet with their representatives and we'll use the consciousness bridge. If they're truly ready to change, we'll know." The meeting point was designated as Unity Station, built in the void between galaxies. It was a marvel of Alliance engineering, a sphere of crystallized space-time that existed partially in multiple dimensions. Here, representatives from both galaxies would meet as equals. The Council sent their 3 surviving leaders: Overseer Krell, whose energy form was barely a shadow of its former self; Administrator Zelka, who had managed to hold the Silver Hegemony together through sheer will; and surprisingly, General Korg of the Grim Confederacy, who had undergone a complete transformation in philosophy after witnessing his people's near extinction. Humanity and the Alliance sent President Chen, Admiral Reyes, and Dr. Thompson, along with representatives from 10 allied species. The meeting began in silence. For the first time in 5 years, humans and their former persecutors stood in the same room. The tension was palpable, history hanging between them like a wall. Then Dr. Thompson activated the consciousness bridge. For 1 minute, that felt like a lifetime. Every being in the room experienced the memories of the others. The Council representatives felt the hurt of rejection, the fear of being judged not for actions but for potential, the pain of leaving behind worlds they had built with love. The humans and their allies experienced the Council's terror of change, their desperate need for stability, the weight of trying to maintain order across 1,000 species. When the bridge deactivated, several beings were crying in their various ways. Krell's energy form pulsed with colors that indicated deep sorrow. Zelka had lost her perfect mercury cohesion, droplets of her being scattered by emotional turbulence. I didn't understand," Krell said, his voice barely a whisper. "We saw your growth as aggression. Your innovation as chaos. We were so afraid of losing what we had that we destroyed it ourselves." The end.